Hi, I'm Brandy. Thank you for stopping by. In this video, we're going to be doing a dresser makeover. I found this gem on the side of the road for free. It's beautiful. It's in pretty rough shape, but I immediately was able to see the potential that this piece could bring. I loved the unique hardware, all original, the legs. It was just an exciting find. I threw it in the back of the truck and brought it home. It had some damage to the leg here where it was wobbly. It had a little missing piece. Also on the top there was some significant damage, a lot of stains, and a couple pieces in the back where it was kind of lifting, and over here there's actually like a little chunk that's missing, but I knew that some Bondo could fix that right up, so I was super excited to get to work on this and see the transformation. When I seen the dresser on the side of the road, it did have all of the hardware on each of the drawers. When I threw it in the back of the truck, one of these handles fell off. So I just threw it inside the drawer just for transportation to make sure that it made it home. So I was excited to know that all of the original hardware was there, and I was planning on just sprucing it up and reusing it because it just went with the curvature of this dresser so smoothly. So the first order of business was to remove all of this hardware so that I can get to cleaning. So I brought out the drill, and some of the handles were a little bit more difficult because they had little push pins at the bottom of them, but I removed all of the hardware, and then I threw everything into a large Ziploc bag for safekeeping. I usually use Ziploc bags or a small container to keep all of the hardware together. Even if I didn't plan on reusing this hardware, I would save it for a different project, but it just went with the curvature of this dresser so good that I definitely from the get-go knew I was going to use the same hardware. So I wanted to make sure it was all safe and sound in one little spot and that nothing would get lost during the process. So I came in for a close shot here. I wanted to really evaluate what was going on with the leg, and what was happening was it was loose. It had a missing chunk and a loose piece, so I knew I was going to have to do a few different things with it. The top of the dresser had this one section where it was kind of coming up, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get it smoothed out, so I just started chiseling off the top part there just so that I can get it back to an even top and maybe even a little dent there so I can fill in with some Bondo. The next step was just to thoroughly clean the entire dresser. So I just used some Dawn dish soap and water with a dish sponge and scrubbed the whole thing down. And after everything was scrubbed clean, I went back through with a wet rag just to kind of wipe it off for that final rinse off. So once it was all cleaned up, it was time for me to get to work on the damaged top. I just used some all-purpose Bondo putty, slopped it onto a piece of cardboard, added the cream hardener that comes with the Bondo, folded that together, gave it a quick mixing. Then you have to move quick because as soon as you put that cream hardener and you start mixing it in, it really activates the drying process. So I just started globbing it onto the damaged holes and then smoothing it over as much as possible, having that little extra overlay, and then I would come back through and sand it. But Bondo is amazing for projects that need or that have this kind of damage like this because it's easy to work with and it's quick drying, so you don't have to wait super long time before you're able to get in there and start sanding. It's usually about 15-20 minutes depending on how much and how thick you apply it. But I went over those 2 holes, and then I used any extra that I had to fill in any little scrapes and scuffs that were on the rest of the top. After that, I came in with some 150 grit sandpaper on my sander, and I just started getting to work on sanding that smooth. And this took a little bit. I could have went to a more lower number grit to make it go a little faster, but I felt comfortable with the 150, just taking my time and going over it. So after I went over the entire top with 150, I went back through with 220 grit as well over the entire surface, just to give it that more smooth finish before getting to paint. For the bottom and the front, I just came in with a sanding sponge, and I wrapped around that 150 grit sandpaper to get into, all the little grooves and stuff that my electric sander would not fit into because it's a big round disc. So I just hand sanded this part, just a scuff sand. I wasn't trying to do anything but just give something for that paint to adhere to. So a little bit of texture for the paint to adhere to. After that, I brought it inside, and this is what it looked like. I had identified that there was a little piece missing down here in the corner that needed to be addressed. So for the first time, I went to use some QuickWood. I went to the hardware store. This is what they suggested. So I just opened it up. It's a 2-part material, I guess you would call it. I don't know what the name of it would be, but it's a 2-part putty. There you go. And so you just give it a good mixing together, and once those 2 colors become a single uniform color, then it's activated, and then it would start drying. And then you basically, I just molded it onto the corner as much as I could, kind of get that shape to how it was going to go. And then that just took a few minutes, and then you just had to let it dry for some time before going back in and sanding it. So I actually really enjoyed using this QuickWood, and I'll show you. I used it a little bit later on the leg of the dresser as well. It worked out really great. I was happy with it. I will definitely be using it again. Very easy to work with. It adheres pretty good, and you're able to shape it. So that's awesome. Then with some help, I was able to flip the dresser up on its back, and I needed to address this back leg that was having the issue. So I just unattached it, and then I was able to get down and kind of evaluate it a little bit more. So as you can see here, there's a missing piece, and then there are loose pieces. So I planned on just coming in with some wood glue. And I just used a butter knife for this because it was easy and I could just toss it in the trash. But I just put some of the wood glue in where those pieces were lifting, a generous amount, and then I wiped it off, and then I just clamped it all together and left it to dry for a couple hours, I believe. Once that was all set aside to dry, I started cleaning the insides of all of the drawers, which some of them were pretty filthy, as you can see here. They weren't all super bad, but there were a couple that were pretty gross. So I had to get those all cleaned out, scrubbed down, wiped down, before I was able to move on. Once the leg had dried, I came back in to unclamp and see how we were looking. When I got it unclamped, everything was perfect. It was nice and dry. The wood was no longer coming up, so I was ready to get to filling in that missing piece, and I just used the QuickWood that I did on the front of the dresser. I just globbed a piece of that off, or clipped a piece of that off, squished it all together to blend, and then I started shaping it onto the leg to try to get it pretty close to the shape that it should have been, and then I just put that aside to dry for a little bit as well. I let it dry for about an hour, and then I came back in and checked on it. It seemed to be nice and dry, so I went ahead and used my sanding sponge with that 150 grit and just started sanding it down and shaping it to match. This took a little bit of time, I'll be honest, and patience, but I finally got it nice and shaped, and then did a test run here and it fit in perfectly, so I just reattached that to the corner and we were good as new with the leg. As you can see, nice and sturdy, no more wobble, no more missing chunk. It was all nice and fixed. And then I went over to address the corner that I had put the QuickWood on. That had dried too. So I started sanding that down into shape as well. So I got a little impatient. I didn't want to wait for anybody to come home and help me. So I tried to get this dresser off of the horses by myself, and disaster hit and it fell and it busted the side over here. So I had to then go back in with some Bondo and do some patchwork, but wasn't a big deal. I just needed to give it a little bit of time to dry and then sand that down. Now I was ready to start applying the primer. So I used this bin primer with shellac base, and I just used whatever brush and a roller for smooth application on the top of the dresser, and then I just started putting the primer or painting the primer on. So with chalk paint, which is what I intended to use, you technically don't need to use a primer, but I've found that it's safer to do so, especially when you're using Bondo or wood filler and stuff like that. You don't want to have that bleed through, coming through your paint. So applying at least one coat of primer really prevents all that from going on. So I just went over the whole top, the sides, the front, the drawers. I just did a whole first or one coat of the shellac based primer. So once I got the primer on everything and after it had dried, I went over with a 220 grit sandpaper, just a quick light sanding, and then wiped it with a tack cloth. Unfortunately, the footage of that didn't take place because I thought I was recording and I wasn't. So next it was time to paint. So I used the Behr chalk paint in the color Pale Sepia. And this is a color that I've been using lately. It is such a beautiful color. It's kind of a grayish, beige-ish color, and it sells really good. So people, you know, when I post these pieces, they usually sell in a day or so. Sometimes, you know, it takes a couple days. It all depends on the market, but the color itself is, I would say, in high demand. It's a really nice color. It goes with any decor. So as you can see, this Behr chalk paint that I picked up at Home Depot, it has great coverage. So even with just one coat of paint, you could see how beautifully it goes on. And I just used a roller, and I also had a chalk brush nearby for the smaller pieces, areas, and the drawers. So just applied this first coat of paint. So by the time I was done painting all of the drawers, the actual dresser was dry. This is what we were looking at after one coat of paint. As I said, very good coverage with just one coat of paint with the Behr chalk paint. I always use 3 coats anyways, but so in between coats, I did a light sanding with a 220 grit sanding sponge. So I just sanded the whole thing down. Well, not down, I just did a light sanding over the whole thing. And then I came back in with a tack cloth to just wipe away any of the dust that was generated from the sanding. And this just smooths things out between coats. It, really starts alleviating a lot of the brush strokes. Brush strokes are inevitable when you're using a brush. So like on the sides, on the front and on the drawers, you're still going to see a little bit of brush strokes, but nothing as bad as if you didn't sand between coats. So also I wanted to note that between coats, I do store my brush and roller in Ziploc bags, and then I just throw them in the fridge. This keeps them nice and fresh, and then I don't need to wash them in between coats, which can be a pain in the butt for sure. So I like to store those in between coats, and then I just got to applying the second coat here. So again, I did 3 coats total. I did 1 coat of the bin primer, and then I did 3 coats of the Behr chalk paint in the color Pale Sepia, allowing dry time in between, doing a light sanding in between, and the 3 coats gave it that amazing coverage that just looked so amazing. I was super happy with the way this project turned out. So after the 3 coats and everything had dried, I threw the drawers back in, and this is what we were looking at, and I was so excited. It just looked beautiful. I love the color. The Pale Sepia is just an amazing color, and you couldn't even tell that there were any issues with it before. The big gouges in the top were fixed and painted over. The pieces, or the piece on the corner that I had repaired, you couldn't even tell. So I came in with the Behr Decorative Wax in the clear color, and then I just started applying that with a brush and then wiping it back with a lint-free cloth. So I just put the wax over the entire piece. I worked in sections, so applying the wax and then buffing it out with the rag. So after I applied the wax, I took the hardware into the kitchen. I used an old pan and I just started heating up some water and some white distilled vinegar in the pan, and then I just threw all of the hardware in there. I let it boil for about 15 minutes, and after 15 minutes had passed, I came back in with some steel wool, the number 0000 grade, and I just carefully pulled each piece of hardware out, being careful not to burn myself, and then I just did a light rubbing or scrubbing with that very fine steel wool, and that did the trick. It just brought out the beauty of these poles. It cleaned them up, it polished them up, and they just looked so amazing. I was super excited. I wasn't gonna have to paint them or anything. And you can actually see here on this one, I only scrub half of it so that you can actually see the difference between the one half after you polish it with the steel wool versus what it looks like just after the boil alone. So you can definitely see the difference right here in that. So this process definitely works really, really good. So once all that hardware was cleaned up, I went ahead and affixed it to the drawers. Once it was all on there, I was so happy. I was just in awe of the beauty of this dresser. So I staged it for some pictures and listed it on Facebook Marketplace for sale. And I picked up this dresser again for free on the side of the road. I was driving by, there it was, caught my eye, threw it in the truck, brought it home, spoofed it up, and posted it for $350. I was super excited about this. I thought that it came out absolutely beautifully. Please let me know what you think in the comments. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. I do come out with new content weekly. I'd love to have you on my journey. You know, any comments or anything you want to say in the comments, go ahead and let me know, good or bad. I take constructive criticism very well. I'm always looking for tips, so all commentary is welcomed. I also threw in a picture of the before at the end here, just so you can remember what this beauty looked like before we gave her a new life. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for stopping by.